guess I'll start at the beginning. I'm not going back to my very beginning, but the first time that motherhood really became, I would say, something that was on my radar, something that I became aware of, was in high school. And during that time, your junior and senior year, when you're starting to think about college and where you want to go and how you want to spend the rest of your life, and there's so many decisions to be made, I remember at that time my father pulled me into his office and said, I have one thing I want to say to you. And I'm sure I gave him an eye roll and didn't think it was important. But I'm here talking about it, so it stayed with me. He said this. He said, you have my permission to just be a mom. No one in this world is ever going to tell you that. No one is ever going to say that to you. And I wanted to make sure that you heard those words at least once in your life. Done. And he didn't have anything more to add to it. He said it. I know I gave him an eye roll. And that was the last I thought about that. I made my college choice. I had a career path in mind. And there I went. At the end of the 4 years, I graduated with a degree in psychology and had absolutely no idea what the next step was. What I did know is I did not want to go on to further education. I was done with writing papers, and I didn't really want to pursue a career in that in any way, nor did I know what I wanted to pursue a career in. I was again faced with a ton of decisions, and something that did keep coming back to my mind was I knew I wanted to be a mom. And I also knew that you can't just leave college and set out to be a mom. That's not how that works. You have to make a living, you have to earn some money, so I just didn't know how to reconcile that. But I knew that was in my heart. I wanted to be a mom, and very specifically, I wanted to be a young mom. So I know so many women today who want to max out their careers and see how far they can get, and everything is about, breaking glass ceilings and equal pay and get out there into the workforce, and I had no desire to do that. Thank God, and the blessing is not lost on me, it happened to be His will that I be a young mom. So I was 23 when I met Adam, and we were married a year later, and 2 years later, my daughter Scarlett was born. And we had a little apartment in Manhattan. And I wasn't pursuing a career, I was volunteering my time. Actually, no, we weren't in Manhattan then. It was after that, I'm sorry. We bought a house. We were living in Ridgewood, and we were setting our little life in place, making that house a home. And there were definitely days of tears of frustration, when you're new at something and it's hard and it's a person and you don't know what they need. But by and large, I would say it was happiness and joy and spending my days with this little person that I was getting to know, and it was so fulfilling. A little isolating, but I almost didn't even care at that point. I was getting used to this new role, and I was cherishing it. And then Enzo came 2 years later. Someone gave me a card at my shower for Enzo, and inside was a verse from Malachi 3:10, and it says, and I love God's tone in this verse, because it's a challenge. He's getting up in our face, and he says, see if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. And that's what Enzo was supposed to be. He was going to be this overflowing blessing in our already blessed life. But that's not entirely how it went, or that's not how I fully remember it. I remember being overwhelmed and stressed and tired. He didn't sleep through the night till he was 1. In hindsight, I probably would have done something about that, but I didn't then. I was exhausted, I was stretched so thin, I was tired, and I became bitter, I became short-tempered, and I found myself lashing out at these tiny, teeny little people. And it didn't feel right. I remember one day lying on the floor of Enzo's nursery on his rug, and he's crawling over me, happy as a clam, playing with his toys, and Scarlett's dancing around, reading books, and I'm just crying, and tears are flowing from my eyes, and there's nothing that I can do about it. I am so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed. I knew this was not the way it was supposed to look. This was not what motherhood was supposed to be. This was not the right picture. I was doing something really wrong. This is not how I was supposed to feel. This is not the life that I had set out for. And I knew I needed to make a change. There had to be a parenting model somewhere out there that I could read and that I could learn from, and I could find out how to make changes. At that time, I was doing a Bible study, one of those community Bible studies. It's called Bible Study Fellowship, where every year you walk through a study with a large group of women and then a smaller core group. And that particular year, the topic was on several books of the Old Testament, sort of journeying through the history of Israel. I don't know when we started, but up through the exile to Babylon. And as I'm frustrated with myself and looking for a parenting model, I know the only place I can go to research was God's word, or words written by his followers. And so I started to pore over my Bible and other books that I had on my shelf, just seeking something that could enlighten me and change my outlook on this whole thing. And it was in reading the Old Testament that I found an answer. I think the Old Testament is often misunderstood and is read like an account of God's wrath and his judgment. And we read about the banishment from the garden, we read about the flood, the slavery in Egypt, wandering the desert for 40 years when we know that's a 6-day journey, battles and wars lost, and defeat at the hands of enemies, countless enemies, devastation, and then finally this horrific exile out of their promised land. Job alone seems to be an arbitrary account of God's callous cruelty to this man, allowing him to face devastation after devastation. But at that moment in my life, as I was reading and searching, I began to understand the Old Testament as something different, and I began to read it almost the way you would read an account of a parent and a child. And as I read through his word, I realized how often he repeats blessings over and over and over and over again. And his covenant promises are made generation after generation after generation. So often you read something along the lines of, if you will, depart from your wicked ways, turn from your whatever you're doing and love me and follow me, then I will, ... To Abraham in Genesis 12, he says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. To Jacob in Genesis 28, he says, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised. To Moses in Exodus, now therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. To King Samuel in 2 Chronicles, he says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Micah 7 says, I may be sitting in the dark, but the Lord is my light. I have sinned against the Lord, and so I must endure his anger until he comes to my defense. But I know that I will see him making things right for me and leading me to the light. And in Jeremiah 31, God makes a new covenant with Israel after the exile, saying, this is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people, for I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. Over and over and over, like a parent correcting a child, he offered ways for his people to enjoy a happier life, an easier life, a life filled with him. He was patient and he was just. Blessing after blessings for Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, and more. Warning after warning for hundreds of years out of the mouths of his prophets as he patiently watched his beloved fall farther and farther away from him. And after an entire history of people, fickle people, living fickle lives, all it took was 40 years before the first remnant returned to Israel after the exile. And when I read that read to me like that little hand slap you give your kid when they've done something wrong, and you know you need to punish them, but you're not gonna really punish them. It's just a hand slap. I read that and I realized that is what it means to parent a child, following God's parenting model. It's unconditional love. It's blessings abounding in every season, at every turn. Everything else will fall into place if that is what drives your every interaction with your child. It's so easy. And it's so very hard. It's not how we were made to be. We fight for justice more than we fight for just loving. And that is where grace comes in. God can take, and did take, this gloriously imperfect example of a mother, this selfish, hot-tempered, distracted, unfocused me, and redeem all of it. In 2 Corinthians 12, he says, "My grace is sufficient for you because my power is made perfect in your weakness." It's precisely because I am imperfect that his grace is revealed for the gift that it is. For if there's anything or anyone that's going to bring about what I hope for my children, it's him and him alone. He controls their going in, he controls their going out, their coming back. He holds their future, and it's he who orchestrates every single detail of their lives, not me. So I'm free then. I am free from the burden of guilt. And I'm free to just simply love. I am free of all the doubts and the fears, and I'm free from any judgment. If I love my God and I trust in the unconditional gift of his grace that washes me clean and redeems me, then that love will trickle down to my children, and they will know that they are seen and loved, and they will in turn come to know this amazing love of our Father that surpasses all understanding. It's so simple. Letting go and trusting in God's grace is probably one of the hardest things you could do. This epiphany for me at that time in my life was life-changing, it was life-charging, and then it was gone. We're still fickle people. We're very fickle hearts. My impatience didn't go away. My short temper was not lengthened. I remained stressed and pulled in a million directions, and more than that, I felt antsy and fidgety. I wanted a deeper story for my life. I wanted a significant story. I didn't want to really just be a mom. My pride wanted way more than that. So life trudged on. More kids came. Well, one more kid came. We have 3. We bought a new house. Kids were now in elementary school. New challenges in parenting seemed to multiply every day. I was still tired, but now there was this monotony, a sameness to my days that was becoming a little mind-numbing. Why was this ever what I thought that I had wanted? This was terrible. Why didn't I seek further education? Why didn't I pursue a career? I don't know. But this task of raising my kids was becoming too small, at least in my mind. Anytime I tried to explore something more, something that took me outside of the realm of my immediate household and my 3 kids, doors were slammed in my face, and I got frustrated. I got angry with God. Didn't he know he had this intelligent mind here willing to go to work for him, and he was letting it sit and go to waste? I was really, really upset and angry by that. And it wasn't really until very recently when sort of the realization that a new chapter is on the horizon, and I probably will go back to work and seek some sort of position or employment outside of the realm of my role of mom. And as soon as that position that I'd held these past 12 years was threatened to no longer be, I realized how much I loved what I do and how I spend my days. My kids are getting older and older, and there are opportunities to share my faith with them that are becoming more intellectual and more relevant to them. They have questions and thoughts. They have minds that are sometimes willing to hear my interpretations of things and how I view my world. They even sat very patiently after watching Avengers Endgame as I shared how it correlates to our faith and yada yada. And I didn't get an eye roll, so that was a win. Motherhood happens to be one of the most clear and reflective of mirrors, shining back at us not an image of perfect love and servanthood, but of our most sinful nature. It's the hardest thing to see because it shines through the faces of our most innocent beloved. But God sent us, his most innocent beloved, to wipe clean our slate and make our relationships whole again, to redeem our flaws and our sins so that we can shine as bright as stars. And ask any kid, that's how they see their mom. Tim Keller says this, the gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe, yet at the very same time we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. The privilege of being God's spokesperson to these little young minds has really settled in for me these last few years. And I know that I am a terrible example of a mom and of living out my faith, but I see God redeeming every mistake and every sin, and I know that my children are in the very best of hands because they aren't in mine. They are in his. And I don't know, this is how my brain works. I just wrote something out because it helps me sort of put things into thoughts this way. But if you take the word motherhood, redeemed by grace, you get my own tremendous human errors resplendent here on odious display, realizing every day exactly each moment earned not, deserved not, but Yahweh grants renewal and cleansing eternal. And that is my story.